Edwin, Evelyn, Cole.
Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer White, and today I would like to speak to you about mental health illness and its relation to substance abuse issues. It's hard for many to even imagine the sheer horror of experiencing a real mental breakdown or an anxiety attack. Imagine out of nowhere you suddenly feel as if you can't breathe. The world begins to close in on you in frames. First, the world's too small. Then the room's too small. Then it's your body that's too small. You feel totally trapped. A million thoughts begin to bombard your brain, bringing with them mass amounts of emotion and, worst of all, fear. Absolute, indescribable fear. This is the reality of many who suffer from mental health issues. This is the reality they want so badly to escape from. I'd like to talk to you today about how mental health issues can very easily, and most often do, lead to substance abuse, and also how substance abuse leads to mental health issues. This is a dangerous and deadly cycle that seems to perpetuate itself. We'll speak today about how the two are related in many cases, also about how addiction is understood now as a mental illness, and we'll talk about some of the common risk factors that contribute to these illnesses. I'll also cover how mental illness contributes to addiction, and likewise how addiction contributes to mental illness, and we'll go over the stigma in admitting that you have either one of these issues, and talk about a few ways that you can try to combat these, try to make them better. First of all, let's speak about substance abuse and mental illness and how the two are related. There's been multiple population surveys that have found that about half of those who experience a mental illness also experience a substance use disorder, and vice versa. Stephen Ross of the New York University, and also a writer, says it's a common occurrence for psychotic illness and addictive behaviors to be co-occurring. This is also called a dual diagnosis situation. Ross is the author of numerous studies regarding psychiatric illness and also on neuropharmacology. Now, in recent years, addiction is being understood as an illness more, and that's great. Substance use disorder changes the normal desires and priorities and behaviors that a person has, and it can interfere with a person's ability to work, to go to school, and to lead successful personal and family relationships. The way this happens is addiction changes the brain by changing a person's normal needs and desires and replacing them with new priorities that are connected with seeking and using the drug. They begin to develop compulsive behaviors, and with that comes the inability to control impulses despite the negative consequences. This is very much like how a mental illness works. There's several different risk factors that can contribute to mental and substance use illnesses. Some of it's just simply genetic. There's research that shows that there are as many genes that contribute to the risk of developing an addiction as there are that contribute to the risk of developing a mental illness. Now, a gene can be passed down generation to generation, and that can influence how a person reacts to using a drug and whether or not it makes them feel good. Stress or trauma can also influence these genes. Abuse in childhood is a big factor that often leads to substance abuse. And it makes sense that those who have suffered some sort of a childhood trauma would try to use drugs and alcohol to escape their reality. A 2018 study published by the U.S. National Library of Medicine says that there's some very strong associations between the two, and they suggest that more children be screened early on for childhood trauma, and that help be made more readily available to them. They suggest that doing this would greatly reduce the number of adults who end up developing into addicts. Now let's talk about how mental illness contributes to addiction and how addiction contributes to mental illness. There's some research that suggests that people tend to self-medicate their mental illness with drugs or alcohol, and I agree with that. It's in this way that they're able to attempt to escape their own reality. There are some drugs that may actually help initially with some of the symptoms of mental illness, but more often than not, they end up making the problems worse. With a mental illness, there are changes that occur in the brain. They may enhance the feeling of reward from using a drug in a false way. Let's talk about the stigma regarding the two. Unfortunately, in today's society, there's still a huge stigma regarding mental health issues and addiction as well. Nobody wants to admit that they have either one of these illnesses. This stigma is carried out by the victims themselves, also by the media, and even by doctors and nurses in the medical field. Stigma can be very seriously damaging. It can cause a person to be reluctant about seeking help or treatment. Friends, family, and coworkers will often have a lack of understanding or knowledge about the subject, and therefore they can become frequently judgmental. The Mayo Clinic website says that through this stigma, people often have fewer work opportunities, they often have fewer housing or school opportunities, and many of them will end up suffering from physical violence or harassment from their peers or loved ones. Also, another big thing is that many insurance companies don't cover benefits for addiction treatment or for rehab facilities. Now, there are several different ways that a person can address these illnesses and begin to seek recovery. Counseling is an option. There are a few different types of counseling one can seek. There's group counseling and individual counseling, and there's several different therapies that counselors will use to assist you in that. There's CBT therapy, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and that attempts to change a person's harmful beliefs and their behaviors. There's DBT, that is more geared to reduce self-harming behaviors, things like suicide attempts, cutting, or drug use. There's inpatient and outpatient rehab facilities, of course, and there's more and more of those all the time that are now addressing and tackling the dual diagnosis situation. There's also many effective medications that are out on the market now that will assist people in withdrawing from substances. And of course, there's more than plenty of medications available to help treat mental illnesses. As you can see, it's very easy for mental illness and addiction to become co-conspirators in destruction. Recently, this topic has garnered much more attention, and there are now numerous places and doctors that are willing to attack these two illnesses together as a whole. As a person who has suffered both of these illnesses and made it through to the other side, I can verify that recovery is totally possible. For me, my mental health issues are what led to my substance abuse problems. I absolutely use substances as a way to escape my reality. It was through counseling that tackled these deep-rooted emotional issues, with the assistance of medication to control my mental illness, and by simply confronting myself in the mirror that became key to my recovery. I have found that if you are okay with your reality, you have no desire to escape it. Thank you very much for listening to my talk today. I'm Jennifer White. Thank you.